Welcome to Real Estate Radio Power Investing, an informative and engaging hour discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate investing. Your host, Tom K. Wilson, provides you with insight and guidance from his years of experience as a successful real estate entrepreneur on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate, and much more. Now, here's your host for Real Estate Radio Power Investing, Tom K. Wilson.
Thanks for tuning in to our Real Estate Radio Power Investing program, where we empower you with the education to maximize your investing success. We're broadcasting from the number one business radio station in the San Francisco Bay Area, KDOW AM 1220, the Wall Street Business Network. I'm Tom K. Wilson, your host for this weekly program on real estate investing. If you can't make the live show, you can catch your podcast on TomWilsonProperties.com or on iTunes or on YouTube. You can also go to TomWilsonProperties.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. It gives you a lot of economic information about what's going on in the real estate market and market cycles, and also gives you access to commercial syndications that we can only offer to our client base, typically products around the country and in California that for $50,000 you can invest in a product that normally only institutional and large investors can have access to. We have today a special guest in studio, Larry Stone, the assessor for Santa Clara County. Larry and his wife moved to Sunnyvale in 1970, so they've been here in Silicon Valley for a long time. Wasn't called Silicon Valley yet. He has an MBA from University of Washington. He was the mayor of Sunnyvale for 2 different terms, has a successful real estate investment and development firm, and he's been reelected 5 times as the assessor of Santa Clara County. The Pulitzer Prize winning author and Washington Post reporter Hayes Johnson says that Larry Stone is an American rarity, a proven political success in a time of political failure. Please welcome the man whose constituency is larger than the governors of 13 states, Santa Clara County Assessor Larry Stone. Larry, nice to have you on the program.
Thank you, Tom, for inviting me.
So, Larry, what has contributed to your success in being reelected? I think you have more friends on both sides of the aisles than most any politician in the country. What have you done right?
Well, the one thing for assessors is to be nonpartisan. In other words, we all have political beliefs. We all vote and so forth, but you can't politicize the assessor's office. The largest single asset that most people own is their home. And if they believe that there's special deals being cut or political deals being cut, it can go south very quickly. So the only thing we really have as assessors is the public's confidence, the property owner's confidence that everything is on the up and up. Okay,
that's most people can understand that. I think, though, what that says is that you've been able to maintain that through all these terms, although I think many people, it's probably easy for their biases to come out, and you've done a good job controlling that. So when you got out of school, you didn't walk right straight into being an assessor. You were on Wall Street for a while, weren't you?
Right. When I got out of graduate school at the University of Washington, I went back and worked on Wall Street in 1967. In fact, I was on the floor of the stock exchange when they broke the volume record that was set in the crash of 1929. And as I recall, it was about 15 million shares, which, maybe 30 million shares, but they do that in the first 5 minutes now sometimes.
I remember my father telling me when I was young, he said, "Son, someday, believe it or not, most people won't believe it, but it's going to break. The Dow's going to break over 1,000."
That's right. I remember those days. I was involved. I got transferred out to San Francisco, so I was with Bates & Company. If that name rings a bell, it doesn't with most people anymore. Right here in San Francisco, when we went over 1,000. So what led you from there to make it out here west? What brought you out here? Well, I was really interested in real estate investment, and so I met a couple of guys. Rather than going back to New York, because my boss wanted me to come back to Wall Street, I met a couple of guys. We started our own company, and it was an investment company, and we were the first tenant at 3000 Sand Hill Road in Menlo Park.
My goodness me. So, and I think you told me before that you were the first tenant there?
That's right. Kleiner Perkins was the third tenant, so they were right next door. So I used to see Gene Kleiner and Tom Perkins in the men's room all the time.
So for those that don't know, Sand Hill Road is one of the highest rent districts now in the country. Higher at times, depending on how our cycles go on NASDAQ, higher than Madison Avenue in New York City, and probably, as I recall, about 1/3 of all venture capital money in the world feeds through Sand Hill Road. Pretty amazing place. Most people that I talk to, my associates in this exciting real estate world that we're in from an investment standpoint, real estate becomes their second or third career. They don't start off that way. What planted the seeds for you to have an interest in real estate investing way back early in your career?
Well, I always wanted to get in the investment business, and so our company was an investment company, and Levi Strauss went public, I believe, in 1972, and they were a very paternalistic company, and all of a sudden their longtime employees became instant millionaires, and they were very concerned about having 90% or more of their net worth tied up in a rag stock like Levi's. And so they hired us to do financial planning, really tax planning. It was very sophisticated at the time. It wouldn't be today. To get these people out of their stock, of Levi stock, to whatever extent they wanted to, and into tax-sheltered investment. And at that time, the highest tax bracket was 70%, so it was easy to invest and shelter money. And so we got into real estate through that vehicle. And finally, I said to my partners, I like real estate a lot better than I like stocks, to tell you the truth, because you could manage it yourself. You were not subject to other people's involvement. And so we kind of morphed into a real estate investment company. We were buying shopping centers and office buildings through syndication, very much like you're doing, and apartments and so forth. And so that's how I got into the real estate business, maybe not by design, but just by necessity.
Where were you buying them?
Buying them mostly in California, but also Arizona. We were buying shopping centers in kind of outlying areas when, the old Safeway, Long's Drugs were getting together. So we were buying in California. We bought also in Arizona, some apartments in Arizona, and shopping centers in Phoenix and Tucson, but primarily in California.
Of course, back then, returns were pretty good, right? That was way before the huge run-ups and the big disparity between metros across the country.
Yeah, there was not as much competition as there is today, and it was good business. Real estate, is a certain amount of risk, like in any investment, but it was pretty solid. We had 5 buildings in downtown San Francisco that we owned at that time.
Well, I think that's, if I were doing it over again, I think that's one change I'd make is start off investing, just add zeros rather than, most people start off with houses, and that's how I started, and then evolved, on up the chain. But from a house perspective, just to put it in perspective to our listeners who haven't been around quite as long as you and I have, my first house was $30,200. Remember it well. My wife's hand was shaking. She assumed we'd be eating hot dogs and baked beans the rest of our lives. Rented for $300, 1% ratio. So that same house today is about $1 million that your staff assesses, and it rents for $3,300 a month. And of course, the headlines are all on, oh my gosh, $3,300 a month, but it only rents for a third the rent per invested dollar that it did when I originally bought it.
I have almost an identical situation. I bought my first house in Sunnyvale for $33,000. Okay. Sold it 5 years later for $58,000 and thought I was rich.
Rolling in dough, weren't we?
But I assumed a first and a second because the interest rates back then were very, very high. A first and a second, and she wanted $3,000 down, and I said, I just put all this money in this new company that I had. She said, how much do you have? And I said, $1,000. She said, I'll take back a third for 2 years. So I bought my first house in Sunnyvale for $1,000 down.
That's terrific. Yeah, it's amazing what can be done creatively both then and now. So what led next to you getting going in the race and getting tapped for the assessor's office?
Well, I grew up in a political family in Seattle, and I didn't do much politics at all. And one day, a guy stopped by my house in Sunnyvale, and he wanted me to sign a petition for some development that was going on. And I said, I really don't sign petitions without knowing what it's about. And he said, well, there's a hearing on this down at City Hall in Sunnyvale on Tuesday night. So I went down there, and I was appalled by the kind of condescending manner that the mayor was treating people that came up to speak. Got involved in an organization at that time, a political organization that was local to Sunnyvale, and decided to run for city council in 1975. I ran against an incumbent that had been there for 8 years and also been the school board member for 8 years, and defeated him, and served 16 and a half years as a council member and mayor of the City of Sunnyvale.
Always been respected for a very, very well-run city, or most of its years, hasn't it? I lived there for 18 years.
Well, I invited Bill Clinton out in 1993 to kick off the National Performance Review, which is the federal government's program on performance management. And when he came out with Al Gore, because he put Al Gore, the vice president, in charge of that program, and he declared the City of Sunnyvale the best-run local government in America, and it was.
Yep, indeed. So that evolved up to political.
Yeah. Then a couple of friends of mine, you called me up, George Marcus and Louis Belmonte, and they called me up one day and they said, hey, the assessor's retiring in Santa Clara County, and why don't you run for it? And I said, what the hell do I want to be the assessor for? He said, well, for a couple reasons. One, you know real estate, and you know how to get elected.
Yeah, and that's good enough, right?
And I love to run for public office. I've been elected 10 times to public office, but only 5 of those have I been opposed. And so so more because I wanted to run than I wanted to serve. Don't tell anybody but that. And
we'll cut that part out. Okay.
And so I ran, was elected, and I've been a mayor and a council member. That's policy making, and I enjoyed every minute of it. But I have a totally different job. I get there by election. And that's a very important thing to make sure the assessor is independent of the people that spend the money. But I'm basically a manager of a small but very important part of county government.
Mm-hmm. And that's so that started in 1994. That was the first time.
I was elected in 1994 as assessor. Took office January 1st, 1995, and I've been elected. 5 times, 6 times. Well, I just announced yesterday I'm running for re-election for another term. The election is next June would be the primary. So I guess everybody's stuck with me for another 4 years if I'm elected.
Oh, wonderful! That's a good good to hear that you're running again. Probably the most popular politician that's ever been in Santa Clara County. It's wonderful to have Larry Stone on the program today on KDOW 1220 AM, the Wall Street Business Network. This is Real Estate Radio Power Investing. I'm Tom K. Wilson. Stay with us. We'll be back with Larry and talk more with him about his job.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Power Investing. Streaming live on iHeart, TuneIn, and KDOW.biz. For more information on today's topic or guest, visit TomWilsonProperties.com. That's TomWilsonProperties.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Power Investing, Tom K. Wilson.
We're fortunate to have with us in studio today Larry Stone, probably the most popular political office in Santa Clara County. And he's been there, just announced his 6th term running. So, Larry, tell us a little bit about this office. What are the responsibilities? And give us some information about what it was like when you took it over and what it's like now and what you're proud of accomplishing.
Well, it's pretty simple to describe what the assessor does. It's a lot more difficult to do it, of course. But there's 58 county assessors, for one in every county in the state, and we're state constitutional officers. So my job, stated very simply, is to determine the assessed value of all real and business personal property in my county. That's bricks and mortar, homes, apartments, shopping centers, office buildings, industrial buildings, as well as business personal property, which consists of machinery, equipment, furniture, fixtures that are inside of those office buildings and shopping centers.
So let me guess, sometimes that becomes the more difficult part to assess, huh?
particularly around here. We're the sixth largest county in the state. We have the fourth largest assessment roll, but we're number 2 in business personal property because we're Silicon Valley.
Sure.
So all those clean rooms and all that, those special
all
purpose
the equipment and inside, how in the world do you figure what that's worth, right? Yeah.
So you build an office building, you got a shell that's accessible, and of course the land is accessible. But what goes inside is very expensive, particularly unique to Silicon Valley.
Okay. So how many people did you have on staff when you got there? How many now? And what was the assessed value when you got there? And what is that now?
Well, when I took office on January 1st, 1995, we had 242 people on my staff. About half of those are certified auditors and appraisers, certified by the state of California. Today, I have 281 people, which is an increase in staff of a little bit more than 16%. The assessment roll, I'm required by state law to close the assessment roll every July 1st. That's a state law. And I've done that on time every year for 23 years. The assessment roll I closed on July 1st, 1995, my first one, was $115 billion. That's the total assessed value of all real and business personal property. The one I just closed this last month, was $450 billion. So that's almost a 4-time increase in the total assessed value, yet my staff has only gone up by 16%. Now, obviously, technology played a big role in that. When I first took office, we had 242 people and maybe a dozen PCs, maybe. And half of those were bootlegged in by employees because they couldn't get one at work, so they had to bring their own from home. So that's the kind of situation it was.
And that was even more unusual to have that kind of technology in a government organization back then, right? I remember bootlegging in Apple IIs to help run a manufacturing line in high tech back in the 80s, but that's even tougher in a government organization to get money for something like that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it takes an education too. I mean, government doesn't think very forward thinking, I guess you would say. So it was very, very difficult. Changing the culture. My office has always been excellent in terms of, a long time before I got there, in terms of the quality of its appraisals and audits. I mean, very, very good technically. The culture was, particularly around customer service, was almost non-existent. And changing the culture in a highly unionized government environment is a very, very difficult thing.
That's a big ship to re-steer, isn't it?
Yeah, it took me 10 years, literally, to do that. Now today, we survey customer satisfaction in many ways because we have many customers, from Cisco and Apple to down to the individual homeowner. But one way we do it, every 6 months, we capture 250 phone calls that come into our office. And we call them back on a robocall type system where my voice comes out and says, can we ask you for, and we know where they go, which division of my office they go. We ask you 4 questions around the service that you received. And the last question, the 4th question, is an overall rating. And the one we did just in May, our overall customer satisfaction rating was 90.28%.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So not many companies or organizations, much less in government, can claim that. We'll be back with a moment with Larry Stone and ask him some real estate questions since he's an experienced real estate investor as well as the assessor of Santa Clara County. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Power Investing. Streaming live on iHeart, TuneIn, and KDOW.biz. For more information on today's topic or guest, visit TomWilsonProperties.com. That's TomWilsonProperties.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Power Investing, Tom K. Wilson.
Larry Stone in studio with us today. Silicon Valley's assessor, reelected 5 times and about to be this number 6. Larry, you're talking about during the break here about how tough it was to change the culture. It took about 10 years. Can you just in a word or two say What were kind of the couple of key characteristics or things that you did to change that culture to being very customer service oriented?
Well, one of the things is that I said when I first arrived and taking my experience in Sunnyvale that we're going to measure everything. In other words, you can't evaluate what you can't measure. And so I said that may take a couple of years. And I was told, I was brand new. I was in my first meeting, I think, with my direct reports. And a guy said to me, he said, Larry, I don't know if you know this, but we're contractually, by union contract, prohibited from evaluating formally the performance of 85% of the people that work in this office. I said, what? He said, I'll change that. But, we're in a highly unionized environment. It literally took me 10 years. It took me like 4 union contracts to get the Board of Supervisors to finally, after a very stinging editorial I got in the Mercury News, we finally got performance evaluations.
So their culture was to avoid anybody being singled out that wasn't performing.
Correct. And my staff is an excellent staff, and I knew that excellent employees were going to get excellent performance evaluations if they were objective. So the question was, the measurement was important, and that's what started the change in the culture, the mindset of the people that work for me. I have excellent people. I have derelicts, a few of them, like any other organization, and it's a question that you deal with those folks very quickly and set the rules, and they either comply or they're gone. But again, in a unionized environment, it might take you a year or two to get rid of somebody who's not performing. But people don't come to us then. I mean, I'm not a great place to work if you're a
freeloader, huh?
If you're a freeloader,
okay.
Right.
Let's hit a couple of stats. What was the valuation at the peak of the bubble before the crash?
Before the crash, probably, and I don't recall, we're at $450 million. It was probably getting well over three. Well, during the crash, let me say this, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but during the crash, we proactively reduced the assessed value on 136,000 properties. That's almost 1/4 of all the properties in Santa Clara County got a reduction in their assessment.
Without asking for it.
Without asking for it. And that reduced the assessment roll by $27 billion. Now, Proposition 8 requires the assessor to reassess properties when the market value drops below the assessed value, and that happened for 136,000 properties, 136,000 properties. Now, Proposition 8 also requires the assessor to restore those values when the market rebounds. Mm-hmm. So we're now down to under 5,000 properties from 136,000 because the market has been surging we're well into the six years of the recovery, the second longest post-recession recovery that we've experienced.
About how much did the value of real estate in Silicon Valley drop during the crash? 25%?
Well, it's hard to know the values because I deal just with the assessed
number
values.
is different.
Yeah,
it
dropped. It dropped at least 25%.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. We have Larry Stone with us, the assessor of Santa Clara County and longtime real estate investor. We'll be back in just a moment here and ask him something about how the job market's going, what the occupancy is looking like, what his predictions are for where we're headed, and other interesting information like that. So stay with us here on Real Estate Radio Power Investing on KDOW 1220 AM, the Wall Street Business Network on KDOW. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Power Investing. Streaming live on iHeart, TuneIn, and KDOW.biz. For more information on today's topic or guest, visit TomWilsonProperties.com. That's TomWilsonProperties.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Power Investing, Tom K. Wilson.
Okay, we have with us in studio today Larry Stone, our assessor for Santa Clara County. Larry, I wish we had all day to chat with you, but this is our last main segment. I want to do some rapid fire kind of questions with you. What's the tax money used for?
That's a great question. I get asked it a lot. 45% of all property tax revenue generated in Santa Clara County goes to public schools, public education. About 18% of the property tax revenue comes to the county for county government programs from law enforcement, the DA, the sheriff, and so forth, as well as the social service programs that are responsibility of the county. 14% goes to the 15 cities in the county, but it's not pro rata. I'm not sure why. It's something that happened before Proposition 13 passed. 10% used to go to redevelopment agencies until the government eliminated redevelopment agencies. Now it goes to pay down the existing debt of redevelopment agencies. About 8%, I think, goes to community colleges, and about 6% to special districts like the fire district and the water district and so forth. So that should add up to 100%, but I'm the assessor. Sometimes I'm not real good with numbers.
That's why you have a big staff to help you with that. Prop 13, Lord, when did that pass?
June of 1978.
78. So that basically froze taxes as long as you didn't move your property. So that has a major impact on your assessment values of real estate compared to most states in the country. Do you think that was a good thing at the time, or do you think it's still a good thing? And what are the pros and cons of the Prop 13?
I did not vote for Proposition 13. I wouldn't vote for it if it was on the ballot today. I understood exactly why it passed. Seniors in particular, but people were being taxed from their homes, and that was absolutely legitimate. The problem was this, is that HP wasn't being taxed from its facility, neither was Safeway or the Bank of America. Howard Jarvis and Paul Gann gave the benefit to everybody on the basis of residential property owners being taxed from their homes. But it is the law. I don't think it'll ever be changed, at least for residential properties. So we enforce the law. And there's some proposals that comes up about every 5 years about a split roll. It's called a split roll. In other words, reassess to market value all commercial and industrial buildings every year or two. I'm on record opposed to that, not because I'm making a decision on revenue. Assessors stay away from revenue issues for the very reasons that I talked to you at the beginning of this program. But it takes about 5 years for me to take an entry-level appraiser and put them in a position where they can reassess and assess shopping centers, office buildings, industrial properties, and so forth. So without a 5-year head start, we could not implement a split roll. And of course, the people that want a split roll want the revenue. They're trying to justify, make up a difference. You know, when Proposition 13 passed, commercial and industrial property owners paid about 55% of the property tax burden. Residential was 45%. Today, that's flipped. Residential absorbs about 55% of the property tax burden. Commercial and industrial doesn't, because homes turn over a lot faster than residential properties. Silicon Valley is a pretty exciting place to live and to work, isn't it? It's very exciting. Our cycles here, I'm just talking a little about real estate now, but economic cycles as well. Our cycles are steeper and faster, going up and going down. So I tell my fellow assessors, just look what's happening in Santa Clara County. It'll eventually get to you. You may not like it because it may be on the downside, but it's the most thrilling place in the world, and I was just lucky to be here. Me too. I agree. We've been here about the same length of time, and I could not be happier and have no interest in leaving. It's an exciting place. How's our economy doing right now? We've had quite a spurt for a while. Are we slowing down? Yes, we are, too, in a bit. I mean, I believe, and it's always dangerous for the assessor to be projecting anything into the future, because most of the stuff that we do in my office is on transactions that only exist, not ones that don't happen. At any rate, so I think you can expect a correction probably within the next 12 months or so. We're in, as I said, the largest post-recession recovery that there is. So we're seeing an overbuilding of office space. I think that bubble it hasn't burst yet, but there's some air being let out of the balloon. Retail is kind of very tumultuous. It's changing very rapidly. Of course, the best property right now from a performance point of view is warehouse and industrial. Warehouse in Santa Clara County has 1% vacancy. Industrial has 1.3% vacancy because there's not been a lot of building. Apartments, I don't know, over 25,000 new apartment units were built in Santa Clara County in the last 2 or 3 years. So I'm beginning to see for sale and for lease signs outside of major apartment complexes. Nothing serious.
Probably more Class A.
Yeah, and Class A, and I'm hearing about, I haven't seen it, but I'm hearing about rent concessions being granted. Not a lot, but a little free rent here.
There's little signs we've seen in past cycles. Just
Absolutely.
Little precursors. Yeah.
This is nothing new to Silicon Valley.
No, you and I are watching cycle number 5.
That's right, and it's kind of like if you're trying to beat the top of the market or find the bottom of the market. It's difficult to pick the horse that comes in last in the race and then the horse that comes in first.
Yeah. Indeed. So you think Class A apartment buildings and maybe some forms of retail are a little bit tougher part of the market right now than, say, industrial or warehousing?
Absolutely. Well, retail. Malls are in real trouble. Somebody projected, a reputable company projected that probably 25% of all malls will be gone in 3 years. Mm-hmm. Okay,
but neighborhood service centers probably a different story, right?
Different story.
Still can't get your hair cut on the internet.
Yeah, but Amazon is really changing the world.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's absolutely amazing.
And yet here they just made a commitment to buy $14 billion worth of brick and mortar. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to figure this out. As soon as we think we got it figured out, things change. We got Larry Stone on with us right now in the studio, talking about the marketplace in this area and the whole world of assessment. Stay with us. We'll be back on Real Estate Radio Power Investing on KDOW AM 1220, the Wall Street Business Network. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Real Estate Radio Power Investing. Streaming live on iHeart, TuneIn, and KDOW.biz. For more information on today's topic or guest, visit TomWilsonProperties.com. That's TomWilsonProperties.com. Again, your host for today's edition of Real Estate Radio Power Investing, Tom K. Wilson.
Larry Stone in studio with us today. Silicon Valley is assessor. Gosh, Larry, this has been fun. We got to get you back on. Can we get you back on sometime?
Absolutely.
We haven't even talked about what you can teach us from your experience in investing in real estate. So we had a .com bust and issue, a build up and bust about 15 years ago or so. How are times now different than back then?
Well, one of the most questions that I'm asked is, what's the difference between the current boom that we've been in for over 6 years now and the dot-com boom, the famous dot-com boom about 17 years ago? Mm-hmm. And my answer is an awful lot is different. In the dot-com boom, commercial development was largely speculative. Developers were leasing space to younger companies, oftentimes startups. They were leasing more space than they really needed for growth that never occurred.
They had no earnings.
No earnings. And, of course, when the dot-com boom went to the dot-com bust, that affected the real estate market in office and R&D and even industrial significantly. Well, today, the developers, up until about last year, 70% of all new office development was pre-leased before it was completed. Now that's significantly less than 50%. So the dot-com boom, the boom that we're in now, not the dot-com boom, but the boom we're in now, Google, Apple, Samsung, LinkedIn, NVIDIA are buying land and building buildings. These are companies with significant earnings that will be around a long time.
They have cash.
Yes, and of course Apple and Google buy a lot of stuff all cash.
Yeah, so, Apple, I think, has more cash than 167 countries.
Right. So these are companies with real earnings, real profits, solid development. So the risk factor around office development in Silicon Valley, even though I believe it's being overdeveloped now, but the risk factor is significantly less because of the quality of people companies that are buying property and building buildings.
And we're a broader-based economy now, aren't we?
Very much so. Still, though, we're still a tech area. There's no question
still
about
NASDAQ,
it. But But the composition of those technology companies are significantly different than they were 17 years ago.
Larry, if someone needs some assistance, how can they get hold of your organization?
Well, you can, go online. That's something we didn't have back when I was first elected. The internet isn't there. And, of course, we used to get 250 contacts with our office when I first took office, 250,000.
Oh,
excuse me. That's counter calls, phone calls, and so forth. That's down to under 50,000 today because of online, the internet, and use it. So you can go on our website or call. When you call my office, you get a person every time.
And what is that website?
The website is sccassessor.com.
Wonderful. Larry, it's been great having you on. We'd love to have you back and maybe talk about your real estate investing experience and what you've learned from that to teach others. So it was great having Larry Stone on with us today, special guest in studio. Remember to go to TomWilsonProperties.com for sign up for our newsletter to give you weekly economic information, also get access to syndication deals that we offer only to our client base. So it was a great program having Larry with us on the Real Estate Radio Power Investing program. Remember, the only thing that matters is what you do next. See you on the next program.